Keats' Lamia, rejecting the restrictions of rationalism. The rainbow is an image that appears frequently in artworks and literature of the Romantic period. In Shelley's Mont Blanc, we see earthly rainbows stretched across the sweep of ethereal waterfalls, not dissimilar to the rainbow that appears in this and many other artworks of J.M.W. Turner. However, the appeal of the rainbow and other natural phenomenon was perceived by Romantic poets and others to be at risk. The two figures in the foreground of Turner's painting, who face away, eyes groundward, despite the marvellous phenomena of the natural landscape behind them, may represent the growing culture of disillusionment of a romantic relationship with the natural world. In 1817, John Keats agreed with Charles Lamb's notion that Isaac Newton had destroyed all the poetry of the rainbow by reducing it to the prismatic colours. Newton's study of optics, published in 1704, was one of many scientific advancements that Keats and his contemporaries felt, as Gigantes summarises, were destroying all the poetry of the living organism by reducing it to the sum of its functions. For Keats, the increase in understanding of the scientific processes that make up the natural world threatened the integrity of one of the natural world's most beautiful and transient features, the rainbow. Keats chose to challenge Newtonian rationality with his rainbow-sided monster, the titular character of Lamia, published in 1820. Lamia is a cursed woman of a snake-like Gordian shape who wishes to regain her human form in order to reunite with her lover, Lysias. Lamia is introduced in the poem in a dazzling but disorientating description, ranging from animals to mythical creatures to colours from across the spectrum of the rainbow. She can be viewed as an embodiment of the features of the natural world that avoid simple categorization, and here we see Keats yoking together the extremes of sensation and abstraction. Gigantes expands on this view, writing that the character Lamia becomes difficult, if not impossible, to contain in aesthetic representation. Furthermore, Keats's description of Lamia exceeds the tellus of aesthetic form. With his poetic language, Keats challenges scientific categorization, as his list of similes create a being that avoids rationalization. Lamia is, quote, a rainbow imbued with vital power and a monstrous object of not Newtonian physics, but rather the science of life. I view the rainbow and Lamia's aesthetic as a metaphor of colour and excess that attempt to challenge both scientific and poetic description. But as the poem's narrative continues, the rainbow, like Lamia herself, becomes a concept that is a risk from scientific approaches and rationalist thought. In the poem's second part, the wedding of Lamia and Lysias approaches, but their union is threatened by the character Apollonius, who strives to reveal Lamia's real form as a snake turned human. In the following stanza, Keats makes a passionate argument against scientific rationalism in defense of the fate of Lamia and other natural phenomena, including the rainbow. The 18 lines of iambic pentameter shape this verse as a heroic sonnet, and as such, I've analysed the poem in two sections divided by a central term, as well as a final couplet. Keats dresses the wedding guests in materials of the natural world, all with their own classical symbolism. Lamia wears willow, a symbol of grief for unrequited love or the loss of a mate, but also a symbol of pliability, a characteristic already established in her rainbow-sided introduction. Lysias holds the thyrsus, a fennel and ivy spear bore by Dionysus, which may allude to Dionysus's mythical association with insanity, of which Lysias succumbs to at the poem's end. Contrastingly, Apollonius wears speargrass, a vegetation with little to no metaphorical meaning, but its plainness, in addition to Keats's malicious adornment of the spiteful thistle on his brow, seems to attempt to diminish and cause discomfort to the image of the rationalist through Keats's words alone. Keats also questions whether All charms fly at the mere touch of cold philosophy. There's an irony in this line, as if Keats is challenging his own poetic illusions. If indeed each charm that adorns his characters is essentially meaningless under the cold eye of science, that rationally the vegetation is representative of nothing. Keats then introduces a second rainbow character, anthropomorphized as a woman, just as Lamia was from snake to female. This rainbow too is victim to rationalization. She becomes confined in the dull catalogue of common things, and Keats's extremes of sensation and abstraction become known. They become tangible as woof and texture. The rainbow is even confined by the punctuation of the poem, and her freedom is halted by the full stop at the end of the line. The final couplet can be read pessimistically, as Lamia and the rainbow succumb to rationalization. Lamia becomes reassociated with the image of the rainbow from her first description, and her form is unwoven, and the Gordian knot of her shape is unravelled by rational thought. Lamia and the rainbow are both turned from abstract, colourful concepts into regimented shades to be logically arranged in the aforementioned dull catalogue. An alternative reading, though, arises as Gigante brings attention to the fact that Keats's original phrase for unweave a rainbow was destroy a rainbow. This linguistic change and decision moves away from the pessimism of a natural phenomenon being destroyed to one that may survive its scientific analysis. The rainbow can be re-woven, while it might not have been able to be undestroyed. Keats's concept of negative capability is relevant here, as he attempts with that concept to access truth without the pressure and framework of logic or science. And he does this with the character of Lamia. Lamia retreats into a shade, once again becoming abstract and beyond aesthetic representation. Her natural brilliance survives in what Keats found of his concept of negative capability. She survives in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. The definitive message of Lamia is ambiguous. The destruction of her human form and the death of Lysias can be viewed as a success for the rationality of minds such as Apollonius, or of Newton and his own unwoven rainbow. But like the rainbow in Turner's landscape, perhaps the shade that Lamia returns to is one beyond scientific, poetic, or aesthetic representation. Turner's rainbow is recognizable as one, despite its lack of prismatic colours, and Lamia remains the emotive focus of the poem despite the apparent triumph of scientific rationality. As she melts into shade, I'm reminded of Marx's revelation that when all is solid melts into air, it is then that man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life. In Lamia, Keats's romantic politics reject the restriction of scientific rationalism and instead strive for emotive and poetic successes beyond the touch of cold philosophy. Thank you very much for listening.